in the early 1700s, while the colonies were still being settled, there was a need for women of purity there, specifically in the French colonies down in New Orleans. So they, the priests there sent out a request for these specific women to be sent over, and little did they know these women would become what is the original vampires of New Orleans.
I see you.
Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. My name is Haley, and we like to do two things on this channel: makeup and talk about things that give me nightmares. So this is a little segment we call Shadows and Stories. This week we are traveling from last week's episode in West Virginia down to New Orleans, where we're going to talk about the original vampires. If you like the makeup look, or like how I tell stories, or want to hear a specific story, please give me a comment, like, subscribe. I really appreciate it because I really love doing this, and I can't wait to do the next one. In the early 1700s, while New Orleans was being settled mainly by male in the trades of like trappers, explorers, and traders, were settling into the area there at three of the major French ports. The community there was mostly Christian, like evangelism, and the priests who kind of ran the area started to become concerned that all of the male population they weren't getting married. And so they were concerned that because they weren't getting married, the religion was going to die off. Because they wanted to keep the religion going, the priests there went to the bishops in the French colonies and requested assistance in finding women for all of these men to marry. And the community there determined that they would just release women from brothels and the jails so that they could travel to the area to find husbands. Of course, the priests who had requested women, they didn't find that the women that were sent there were suitable for the men. So they actually then turned to France, like the priests there, and requested that women be sent from France to the French colonies, or specifically to the New Orleans area, so that the men could have women that they found more pure to marry these men. So King Louis at the time agreed to send some women over to the American colonies so that the men would have somebody to marry. And that was at the request. They asked the local like orphanages and nunneries to send pure women to the colonies so that these men could find wives. So the first round, for lack of better words, the first round of girls was sent over on a ship called the Pelican in 1704. And I guess everything was fine and dandy with the first set of girls. They were married off, such. And then in 1719, a second round of girls was sent over to the French outpost called, I believe, Biloxi. And again, everything was as fine as it could be. Then, in 1728, a third round of girls, they were sent over to New Orleans, which was now 10 years old at the time. Prior to the girls in 1728 showing up, a nunnery was built by the Ursuline nuns from Rouen, I believe is how you pronounce it, France. And these nuns had come over and set up a nunnery with a school so that they could educate the girls that were coming. And so in 1728, when the third round of girls were sent over, they went to stay with the Ursuline nuns until they could find themselves husbands. Now, unfortunately for this third grouping of women, the conditions that they met while traveling overseas were not good. They apparently had run out of most food about 2 or 3 weeks in, and the entire journey took 3 to 6 months for them to get from France all the way to New Orleans. As well as running out of food, the girls were also just cramped down into damp, wet quarters beneath the ship. So unfortunately there was a ton of disease that had taken over. The girls were emaciated, covered in sores. They weren't doing well. What food the girls did have was like cured meats and something called hardtack, which I think is like some sort of dry biscuit situation, but the hardtack that they did have was said to be infested with weevils, which are those like gross little bugs that sometimes pop up in like flour or rice or something, and that's what they were eating. And so obviously the girls, their health was declining from the conditions. Obviously being under the ship, they also had severe vitamin deficiencies, so they weren't looking the same as when they had gotten on the ship. By the time they had made it across the ocean, they'd captured diseases like scurvy, yellow fever, cholera, things like that. And so when they made it through the Mississippi River, they were described to look ghostly pale and had hollow cheeks. And, you know, men, they didn't exactly find these women to be the healthy women that they had pictured they were going to get. So the girls arrived in New Orleans, and obviously they did not look how they did when they had left France. They were described to be incredibly pale and emaciated, and it's kind of when rumors started to spread that the girls were vampires, and it wasn't only because of their appearance. The girls, and please excuse my pronunciation, but they were called filles à la cassette in French, which means women with suitcases or casket girls, because they carried these suitcases with all of their belongings. They weren't very big, but they looked like little coffins with them. As the girls were getting off the ship, things like that, they didn't have husbands when they got there. So they were transferred to go live with the nuns for a while until men claimed them or whatever. Now, unfortunately, the time period that it was, the men, a lot of the men turned out to be abusive towards the girls that did end up getting married. And so a lot of the girls were unable to find husbands, didn't want to find husbands, so they had to turn to other means of survival, and therefore they were going into working into brothels, things like that, just to make sure that they could get by, which obviously didn't go well for them in the long run. Now, the girls, when they had arrived, it's also said that they look like vampires because they were so pale, and they weren't used to the tropical like environment that there was there. And so because of their deficiencies and things like that, when they got off the ship, the heat and the sunshine caused their skin to turn bright red, and they would blister. So obviously that's, you know, people would look into that how they wanted to, and they just determined that the girls were vampires, with the girls who were unable to find husbands turning to things like working in brothels or other means to make sure that they could, you know, still survive while in this place that they didn't know. And word of the women being abused by their husbands, it traveled back to France, fortunately. And King Louis No, we're actually not doing that. So he actually called that the women be brought back to France because he found that the treatment of them was unacceptable. So the girls packed their things back up into their little casket-shaped suitcases and returned to the Ursuline nunnery, where the nuns stored their suitcases in the third level of the building, which wasn't really used for much of anything. So until the ship returned for the girls, that's where they kept their stuff. The day that the ship arrived, the nuns returned to the third level of the building to retrieve the suitcases for the girls. This is when things got odd, because going upstairs and grabbing the suitcases, when they went up there, they found that the suitcases were empty, which was unusual. And the nuns actually suspected that something supernatural had occurred. Sorry guys, I had to step away for a second to powder and set everything. I got a nasty sunburn last week, and so my skin's trying to recover from it a little bit still. I'm mostly better, but it's not 100% yet, so just went off camera, go finish that real quick. Today's video is a little short anyway, but let's finish this. After the nuns found the suitcases to be empty, which they just, their minds turned to it being some sort of supernatural phenomena. They wanted to make sure no one was going to ever get back up into that area of the building again. It said that they had some nails that were blessed by the Pope at the time, and then they used those nails to nail the windows shut so nothing could ever get in again and happen. Which, I mean, if it works, it works. They just, like, there were rumors because the girls had appeared to be, like, vampire-like when they got there, so they kind of, I guess they went along with it and assumed that the girls were either vampires, or that because the suitcases were now empty, they had brought vampires to New Orleans. And that is kind of, and that's just kind of the story of the original vampires. I am gonna go finish this look up, and I will be right back to show you the final. So this is the final look. Very cute. My skin, not so cute this week, but it's okay. Makeup is makeup, and I love it either way. I do apologize for this video being a little bit shorter than we normally have. I am kind of dealing with a lot of stuff. I got sick last week with a major sunburn, and then this week I'm actually preparing to go get injections done in my spine, so I'm just trying to make sure I get something out to you this week. But I will be back again next week with a new story. I think we're going to be talking about the Mansfield Penitentiary there. But if you like this week's look, or even the story that I told, I hope that you do subscribe and come back next week for the next video. Thanks for coming today, guys. Bye!